Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're new here, welcome to Her Silent Revenge. I'm so glad you found this channel. My sister's wedding was supposed to be the happiest day of our family's year. My mother had been planning it for months. The flowers, the seating chart, the little ribbon-tied favors on every chair. My sister Rachel had found the perfect venue, a restored farmhouse outside of Asheville, North Carolina, with string lights in the oak trees and a dance floor made of reclaimed wood. It was beautiful. Everything was exactly as it should have been, except my husband wasn't supposed to be there. Let me back up. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. I've been married to my husband. I'll call him Daniel for 3 years. We met at a mutual friend's dinner party in Charlotte. He was charming. He was patient. He was the kind of man who remembered what kind of coffee you ordered the first time he ever bought you one and brought you that exact thing every morning for a year without being asked. I thought that kind of attention was love. I didn't understand yet what it actually was. The morning of Rachel's wedding, I was in the bridal suite helping her into her dress when one of the catering staff knocked on the door. She was young, maybe 22, wearing the standard white shirt and black apron the whole crew had on. She asked if anyone needed water or anything from the kitchen. We said no thank you. She started to leave. Then she turned back, looked directly at me, not at Rachel, not at my mother, directly at me, and said very quietly, "Are you Claire? Claire Mercer?" I said yes. She reached into her apron pocket and handed me a folded piece of paper. "Someone asked me to give this to you before the ceremony started. He said it was urgent." He said, she hesitated like she was trying to remember the exact words. He said, "Don't let your husband see you read it." Then she was gone. My mother was fussing with Rachel's veil. Rachel was tearing up looking in the mirror. Nobody else had noticed. I unfolded the paper. It said, "Room 12, the East Wing guest quarters. Come alone. I'm not dead. Don't trust Daniel. Dad." I stood completely still for what felt like a very long time. My father died 14 months ago. Heart attack, the doctor said, sudden. He was 63 years old and had been healthy his entire life. I held his hand in the hospital. I watched them turn off the machines. I stood at his grave in the November rain and drew the first handful of dirt. I folded the paper back up and put it in my dress pocket. "Claire, you okay?" Rachel was looking at me in the mirror. "Yeah," I said. "Just emotional. You look incredible." I waited until my mother took Rachel downstairs to meet the photographer. Then I walked to the East Wing. Room 12 was at the end of a narrow hallway. I knocked once. The door opened immediately, like someone had been standing right behind it waiting. My father looked thinner. His hair had gone fully gray in a way it hadn't been 14 months ago. He was wearing clothes that didn't fit him right. Jeans too loose, a flannel shirt I didn't recognize. But it was him. It was completely, unmistakably him. I didn't scream. I don't know why. Maybe I was too far into shock to make any sound at all. I just stood in the doorway and stared. "Come inside," he said. "Close the door." I did. "You need to sit down," he said. "I need you to tell me what is happening," I said. My voice was very calm. I remember being surprised by that. He sat across from me at the small table by the window. He put his hands flat on the table like he was steadying himself. And then he told me. He said that for the last 4 years of his life, the years that overlapped almost exactly with my relationship with Daniel, he had been quietly, carefully discovering things. He had started noticing small inconsistencies. Daniel's work schedule that didn't match the company he claimed to work for. A phone number saved in Daniel's contacts under a woman's name that, when my father searched it, routed to a logistics company with no public address. A storage unit registered in a name my father didn't recognize, but paid for with a card linked to an account he managed to trace back to Daniel through a series of LLCs. My father was not a suspicious man by nature, but he had spent 30 years in financial compliance. He knew what a shell structure looked like. He knew when numbers were being moved in ways designed not to be seen. He went to the FBI 8 months before his death. They told him that Daniel was a person of interest in an ongoing federal investigation involving money laundering and wire fraud connected to a trafficking network operating across the Southeast. They told him that Daniel had almost certainly become aware that someone close to him had been asking questions. They told my father that he was in danger. The death was staged. The FBI arranged it. My father had been in protective custody for 14 months, relocated twice, waiting for the case to develop far enough that they could move. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. It was the only question I could form. "Because they told me Daniel might have a way of knowing if you knew," he said. "That if your behavior changed in any way, he would disappear, and they'd lose everything they'd built. They needed you to not know. They needed you to be real." He looked down at his hands. "I'm sorry, Claire. I have been sorry every single day." I thought about the last 14 months. I thought about crying at the grave. I thought about Daniel holding me while I cried, rubbing my back, saying all the right things. I thought about how after my father's death, I had leaned into Daniel more than I ever had before, because he was what I had left. I felt sick. "What happens now?" I said. "They're moving today," my father said. "There's an agent here on the property. They've been watching Daniel for the last 72 hours. Today was chosen because he'll be in one place at a known event for several hours. They're going to make an arrest." He paused. "But they need something from you first." He explained it carefully. There was a secondary account, a transfer that Daniel was waiting on, one final move of funds before what the FBI believed was a planned exit. He needed to believe nothing had changed. He needed to believe I was still completely in the dark, still his grieving wife who trusted him completely. The agent needed me to go back to the wedding, sit beside Daniel, act as I always had for approximately 2 more hours. "And then?" I said. "And then it's over," my father said. "The agent came in then. Her name was Torres. She was in her mid-40s, wearing guest clothes that fit the wedding perfectly. I wouldn't have noticed her in a crowd. She confirmed everything my father had said and added the parts he'd left out, that Daniel had a go bag in his car, that his phone had been showing unusual activity since that morning, that they believed he was planning to leave the country within the week, possibly within days." She looked at me steadily. "I know this is a lot to absorb, and I want to be clear, you don't have to do this. We can make the arrest right now. But it is possible he's already triggered a mechanism that would move the funds before we can freeze them. Victims of this network, real people, could lose access to restitution we've spent years building toward." She paused. "It's entirely your choice." I thought about Daniel at the breakfast table that morning, cutting fruit and telling me I looked beautiful in my dress. I thought about him reaching over and fixing a strand of hair that had come loose. I thought about the look on his face, patient, careful, attentive. "I'll do it," I said, walking back across the farmhouse grounds with the string lights overhead and my father alive in a room behind me and an FBI agent somewhere in the crowd I couldn't identify. I felt like I was moving through water. Everything looked exactly the same as it had 2 hours ago. Rachel was on the lawn taking photos with her new husband. My mother was crying happy tears and dabbing them carefully so she wouldn't ruin her makeup. Cousins were milling around the cocktail hour tables. Daniel was standing near the bar with 2 glasses of champagne. He smiled when he saw me. He handed me one. "There you are," he said. I was starting to wonder. "I was helping Rachel fix her bustle," I said. "You know how long that takes?" He laughed. He put his arm around me. He kissed my temple. I smiled and leaned into him and took a sip of my champagne. For 2 hours, I was the most convincing person in that room. I laughed at the toasts. I danced with Daniel during the first open dance. I watched Rachel and her husband cut the cake, and I let myself cry a little, real tears, because I was thinking about my father standing behind a closed door 60 yards away and never getting to walk his daughter down the aisle, and the grief was completely genuine. Daniel held my hand and said, "He would have loved this." "I know," I said. At 6:47 in the evening, my phone buzzed once in my clutch. A single word from an unknown number, ready. I excused myself to use the restroom. I walked to the edge of the property near the parking area, as Agent Torres had instructed, and I stood there and I waited. It was very fast. 3 vehicles. Plainclothes agents who had been guests all afternoon. Daniel had been walking toward the parking area, toward his car, toward the go bag, moving early, maybe spooked by something, or maybe the plan had always been to slip out before the night ended. I'll never know exactly what changed for him. I watched them put his hands behind his back. I watched him stop moving. I watched him look around the parking area. For an exit, I think, out of pure reflex, and then I watched his eyes find me. He stared at me for a long moment. I didn't look away. They put him in the vehicle and drove away, and then the parking area was very quiet and the music from the reception carried faintly through the oak trees, and I stood there until my legs felt real again. My father came out of the east wing an hour later after the guests had been quietly, carefully managed by the agents on the property. Rachel knew by then. My mother knew. My mother sat on a bench under one of the oak trees and held my father's face in both of her hands and didn't say anything at all for a very long time. Rachel found me standing alone near the dance floor after everyone had started to realize the evening was shifting into something none of them could quite name. "Are you okay?" she asked. I thought about that for a moment. "I think I will be," I said. "Today I think I'm just trying to stay standing." She put her arms around me and held on. The string lights were coming on one by one as the sky got dark. Somewhere across the lawn, my father was sitting with my mother, alive, in clothes that didn't fit, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The weeks that followed were not simple. The FBI debriefed me 4 times. There were things about Daniel's operation that I had unknowingly been adjacent to, not complicit in. Agent Torres was always careful to say, never complicit but present near. Our joint accounts were frozen during the investigation and then unfrozen, with most of the balance flagged as potentially commingled funds. I moved into my sister's guest room with 2 suitcases and a box of books. I learned that the woman whose name had been in Daniel's phone was not a romantic involvement. She was a handler. She had been managing his communications with the organization for over 2 years. I learned that the logistics company my father had traced was a real entity, currently under federal indictment, with operations in 4 states. I learned that Daniel had been recruited before I ever met him, that the life he was living when we met had already been built on top of something else, something older and darker that I had never been close enough to see. I don't know what to do with all of that. Some days I think I'm fine. Some days I wake up at 3 in the morning and lie in my sister's guest room and think about every moment I mistook for love and wonder which of them were real and which were performance, and I can't always tell the difference, and I don't know if I ever will. But here is what I know. My father is alive. He has dinner at Rachel's house every Sunday now. He is learning to use a slow cooker, which he is terrible at, and we all tell him it's wonderful, which is the best kind of lie. My mother has not let him out of her sight for more than 4 hours at a time since he came back, and he doesn't seem to mind at all. And I know this. I walked back across that farmhouse lawn and I sat beside a man who had built his entire life as a cover for something I still don't fully understand. And I smiled and I waited. And when the moment came, I was exactly where I needed to be. Nobody gave me a script. Nobody told me how to do it. I just thought about my father in that room. I thought about the people those funds were supposed to reach. I thought about the 14 months I spent grieving someone who was alive and loving someone who wasn't what he seemed. And I decided that if this was the last thing I had to do to get my life back, I was going to do it right, and I did. Thank you for listening. If this story moved you at all, please leave a comment below. I read every single one, and they mean more than I can say. If you want to hear more stories like this one, subscribe to Her Silent Revenge and hit the bell so you never miss one. And before you go, where are you watching from tonight? Tell me your city. I'll see you in the next one.